War is, without doubt, the most destructive force on our planet. Forget your earthquakes, your hurricanes, and your volcanoes. Their destructive power, although immense for a few hours, pales into insignificance against the destructive power of war. The destruction of cities, the millions of victims of any worldwide conflict, the destruction of whole economies and entire races of human beings. These are just some of the effects of war. Nuclear war cranks up the destructive potential to an even greater height. It was Albert Einstein, reflecting on the pure destructive potential of the weapon he helped to create, who said, "I know not with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones." He understood that a worldwide nuclear war had the potential to push the human race back into the Stone Age. And yet war, it seems inevitable, and it seems to be an ever-present aspect of human nature. So what can we learn from the wars of the past, let alone the wars of today? On this 75th anniversary of the surrender of Japan, perhaps it's worth just taking a look at the causes of that particular conflict. Between 1928 and 1932, Japan faced economic and domestic crisis. The Great Depression, which was across the whole world, had led to spiraling prices, economic collapse, mass unemployment, falling exports, and social unrest. In November 1930, the Prime Minister of Japan was shot by an ultra-nationalist. In 1932, the army tried to assassinate the next Prime Minister, and ultimately the military seized control of the country. Between 1932 and 1936, admirals ruled Japan. They were, unlike British admirals, I'm sure, confident and arrogant. They believed that the whole of Asia should be ruled by them as a way out of economic collapse. China was invaded, and in response in 1941, the United States announced a punitive oil embargo. For the Japanese leaders, that move was a pretext for war, unleashed in December 1941 with the Pearl Harbor attack. The rest, as they say, is history, including the history that some of our neighbours haven't lived through in all its horror. In our monthly information sheet for this month is a compelling and harrowing tale of what it was like to serve in the Far East in the 1940s, penned by that recently deceased member of St Faith's that I mentioned earlier, Govan Easton. If you haven't read it, I think there's a few copies available over there. Sandra's nodding. And please pick one up on your way out to read Govan's story, or if you're watching online, download it from our website. But it is the history behind the history from which we need to learn. The conditions which prompted the rise of the Japanese military machine are very similar to those that led to the rise of Hitler half a world away. Market forces in crisis, spiraling debt, unemployment, and poverty, however they were caused. It is when economies go bad that people look to extremist leaders for solutions. Now, given our current economic woes throughout the world, not least as a result of COVID-19, I suggest that we need to be on our guard against that tendency. We must not let populist fearmongers rise again. We must not let fear drive us to more war. War is what happens when language fails, and when we focus our angst, our fears, our problems on some other easily identified group. For the Nazis, it was the Jews. For the Japanese, it was the evil Americans and their allies. Today, for billions of people throughout the world, the West is still perceived as the great Satan. And many in the West, following populist leaders, are blaming immigrants and others of all races for the problems that we face. To imagine that the Second World War was the last great war is to be naive in the extreme. There's never been a war to end all wars, and there never will be, for as long as human beings choose violence over talking, self-preservation over sharing, hatred of other instead of love of neighbour. British troops have been involved in wars all over the planet since 1945. Many of you will remember such wars. Some of you have fought in them. Greece, Malaya, Korea, Egypt, Kenya, Cyprus, Indonesia, Dhofar, Aden, Nigeria, Northern Ireland, the Falklands, Lebanon, the Gulf War, Bosnia, Iraq, Kosovo, Sierra Leone, Afghanistan, Iraq again, Libya, and Syria. That's quite a list, isn't it, when you hear it read like that? But, my friends, there is another way. Writing around 2,700 years ago, the Jewish prophet Micah dreamed of a day when all the peoples of the earth would learn the ways of God. He will teach us his ways, said Micah, so that we will walk in his paths. He will settle the disputes between peoples, and they will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Everyone will sit in peace under their own vine, and no one will make them afraid. But this peace will only come about when the peoples of the earth finally accept that teaching of God that Micah refers to. When the peoples of the world accept the rule and the governorship of God, when they take God seriously at what he means when he tells us to love our neighbours as ourselves. That's a message repeated again and again through the Jewish and Hebrew scriptures and the scriptures of all the great religions. It's so much so that it's known as the Golden Rule. It's a message that was taken up with vigour by Jesus of Nazareth. Only when we stop keeping the best stuff for ourselves, being content to watch our neighbours in other lands starve and die, will the world ever find the peace for which we yearn. If we will let him, the Lord will indeed be our shepherd. If we will follow his ways, he will indeed lead us beside still waters. Our cups will indeed overflow. Amen. Amen.